You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program, Mom. Zev Brenner. It's been quite a while, but I know the Lewin family. I don't even want to say for how long. Many, many years. Wonderful family, very valuable to the Jewish community, and fighting for just causes. Alyza Lewin joins us. It's been a while, but she is a very prominent attorney, president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, works together with her father under Lewin and Lewin, and she has been successful in helping our Avi Zinger. He's the head of Ben & Jerry's in Israel, fight against Unilever. So, Alyza, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Zev. It's good to be here.
Good to be back. So there you are in July of 2020. Unilever drops its bombshell. They're not going to renew the franchise of the Israeli Ben & Jerry's because they sell in Judea and Samaria. And this is against what Ben & Jerry's of Vermont, that company that sold their company to Unilever, says they won't allow it. So that's when you get involved together with your father to try to sue on behalf of Ben & Jerry's of Israel. So let's pick up from there.
Sure. So it's July 2021, not July 2020.
2021. Okay.
Okay.
The COVID year seems to get a little frozen, right?
Exactly. So July 2021, after the announcements, my father, as I say, who always thinks about these things in a very legal, strategic way, realized that there needs to be a way for Avi Zinger to go into court in the United States to file a lawsuit against Unilever and against the Ben & Jerry's board in Vermont in order to rectify the situation. And what became apparent when we spoke with Avi Zinger was that the demands that Unilever and Ben & Jerry's, it was really the Ben & Jerry's board at the time, was putting on him, is they were saying to him, you have to stop your sales in Yehuda and Shomron, in East Jerusalem, in what they were calling the occupied Palestinian territories, or what I should say, the BDS movement was calling the occupied Palestinian territories. And Avi Zinger said, I can't do that. To do that is asking me to break the law, to do something illegal. Because there are two things. One, Israel has not only an anti-boycott law, but Israel has an anti-discrimination law, just like we have in the United States. A law that says that you can't discriminate in terms of the services you provide, right, or the products that you give to others based on any of those criteria that we have here in the United States, right? Your race, your religion, your gender, a whole long list. And one of the things that Israel's anti-discrimination law includes is you cannot discriminate based on residence, based on where people reside. Now, Avi Zinger, you have to realize, he brought Ben & Jerry's ice cream to Israel before Ben & Jerry's was even known by most of the Americans. He has been the exclusive manufacturer and distributor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel for almost 35 years. And he's been selling it all over. He distributes to all the major supermarket chains, to all the mini markets that are in all the gas stations across the country and across Judea and Samaria. And in fact, in those areas, the largest number of consumers actually happen to be Palestinians, because not only does he actually sell and his product is available in places like Ramallah, but when you talk about, for instance, the Rami Levis that are in that area, the customers who come are overwhelmingly Palestinians. The employees who work there are overwhelmingly Palestinians, because the Palestinians find that in the supermarkets like Rami Levi, they can get a better selection and better pricing than they get in the Palestinian cities and the smaller markets. So what they were asking now Avi to do, or demanding that Avi do, is say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to make my product available to the supermarkets and the stores over the green line. He said, I can't do that. That's a violation of the anti-discrimination law in Israel. That would be asking me to break the law. And that would then have very negative consequences, obviously, for his business and for him personally. So the legal theory that my father came up with is, wait a minute, they're conditioning the renewal of Avi Zinger's license on compelling him to do something unlawful, right? There is no reason, and they acknowledge that there was no reason to not renew Avi's license. In fact, it was automatic. I mean, now this is, like I say, for 35 years almost, it was understood he was going to continue doing this. He embodied Ben & Jerry's and Ben & Jerry's social mission. The product, the brand was exactly, it was the same product that it is in the United States. He gets his ingredients, his supplies from all the same sources. He's the only product in Israel that has the fair trade label on it, just like Ben & Jerry's. I mean, everything that he did, he was exemplary. So there was no reason not to renew his license other than that he was refusing to stop selling in Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem. So that's when we decided, okay, let's talk to Avi and explain to him that he can bring a lawsuit in the United States. And the theory of that lawsuit is Unilever has to extend and continue his license because the condition that they're putting on him is an unlawful condition. You can't in the United States, as a condition of a contract, demand that somebody do something illegal. And that's what they were doing. And so it was on that basis that we brought the lawsuit in New Jersey.
But you brought the lawsuit against Unilever, the parent corporation that bought Ben & Jerry's. It's complicated. Maybe explain the relation between Ben & Jerry's company. They sold it to Unilever, but yet they exerted influence on some business decisions that the parent company makes.
Well, we actually sued both Unilever, the parent company. We sued what's called Unilever USA. And we also sued Ben & Jerry's homemade ice cream, which is the Vermont establishment. So in 2000 is when there was a merger. Now, it's very interesting because that merger between Unilever and Ben & Jerry's, so what people know about it is that when the two companies merged, Unilever agreed to create this unusual arrangement where there'd be this independent board that would still have some say over social mission issues. But what many people don't know is that that merger also had to be approved by the Israeli competition authorities, to make sure, right, that there are no concerns of antitrust issues, monopolies. So what happened is, prior to that merger, Ben & Jerry had actually purchased a 60% interest in Avi's business. You have to realize Avi was running his own business in Israel. He was a licensee. He manufactures the ice cream in Israel. He has a factory. He manufactures. It's actually one of the reasons why your listeners will understand. Israel is the only place where you can get kosher LePesach Ben & Jerry's ice cream, because Avi Zinger koshers his factory for Pesach. He manufactures a flavor, a charoset flavor for Pesach that's not available anywhere else in the world, because Avi Zinger had his business in Israel as a licensee all these years. And so Ben & Jerry actually had purchased an interest in his business because they were looking and thinking of expanding beyond the Israeli territory. He was thinking of maybe trying to expand into Greece or into Turkey. And when Unilever merged, the competition authority in Israel said, wait a minute, Unilever owns Strauss. Strauss controls the market share of ice cream in Israel. This is in 2000. If Unilever purchases Avi Zinger's business, which now includes a 60% ownership of Avi Zinger's business, then you'll basically have Unilever cornering the ice cream market in Israel. So the competition authority issued certain conditions. They said, our approval, we will only agree to this merger on certain conditions. And they issued what was called a consent decree. And as part of that consent decree, Ben & Jerry's had to divest itself of that 60% interest in Avi's business, give Avi 100% control of his own business. And one of the pieces of that agreement was that Unilever would agree not to interfere with Avi's running of his business. Avi was totally to be independent, able to run his business without the interference of Unilever, because Unilever was controlling Strauss, the competition. So clearly what Unilever and Ben & Jerry's were trying to do now was a violation of that 2001 consent decree issued by the Israel Competition Authority. So that was yet another level to this suit. But that's the merger agreement that we're talking about. And so
there are two strikes against them. They want Avi to break Israeli law, and they're in violation of the agreement which they established with Avi Zinger when Unilever bought the company. Our
exactly.
guest is Alyza Lewin, president of Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, and she works together with her father, Lewin and Lewin. We're looking at the Ben & Jerry's case, which she and her father successfully litigated. So there are two strikes against them. So what happens? You threaten to sue.
So we brought a lawsuit in New Jersey, which is where Unilever is headquartered, against Unilever and against Ben & Jerry's. And we sought as an initial matter, what they call a preliminary injunction. We wanted to make sure that Unilever would not stop Avi Zinger's license, which was set to expire at the end of this year, at the end of December 2022. Now, I should just, as an aside, explain, because one of the things that people mistakenly believed is that people thought that what this was by Ben & Jerry's was just what they were calling a quote unquote settlement boycott. That, oh, they weren't asking to boycott all of Israel. But that was really a deliberate, I think, misrepresentation by those who were pushing for this boycott.
The Ben & Jerry's says we love it. Didn't they come out with a statement? We love Israel. Didn't they say that? They tried
so Unilever, and so that's the thing. From already July, you could see that there was a division between Unilever and the Ben & Jerry's board. Unilever said we love Israel, and Unilever, of course, Unilever has many people, and this is part of the statement they ultimately issued with our settlement, all these employees working in Israel and all these products that they sell in Israel. In fact, they're selling Strauss ice cream in Yehuda and Shomron, right? This is not coming from Unilever. This is coming from BDS and the Ben & Jerry's board, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, and the Ben & Jerry's board. But what you have to realize is what happened when Avi Zinger said, I will not stop selling in the territories. They said, okay, then we are ending our 34-year relationship. You will have no license anymore. Your license will not be renewed. Well, if Avi Zinger is the exclusive manufacturer and distributor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in all of Israel, and you stop his license, then that means that come January 1, 2023, there will be no Ben & Jerry's ice cream, not just in the territories, there'll be no Ben & Jerry's ice cream anywhere in all of Israel. So what they in actuality were doing was forcing a boycott of all of Israel by shutting down Avi Zinger. Because there was no way for anybody to do lawfully under Israeli law what they were demanding. So the outcome was going to be a full and complete boycott of all of Israel. All of Israel would no longer have Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
Which may not be a bad thing.
Maybe a waistline, but not for...
But for Avi Zinger, I feel bad. Okay, so now...
And it's not just, and I should say it's not just Avi Zinger, right? Avi Zinger has about 170 employees in his factory, which is in southern Israel. Those employees include refugees. He has Sudanese refugees. He has Ethiopian refugees. I mean, he has people who have come as refugees to the country, as new immigrants who have come to the country. He is an outstanding employer. But then he also has
a social justice platform of Ben & Jerry's. That's the irony of the whole thing.
Absolutely. And not only that, so then he has also thousands of Israeli and Palestinian suppliers and distributors who rely on the factory for their business. So it's the farmers who are giving him ingredients, it's for his packaging, it's for his supplies, it's all his distributors who are driving his trucks, who are delivering it. All of these people, they were all going to be harmed by shutting down his business. And not only that, one of the things that we included, and this is part of when you asked me about the case that we filed the lawsuit, but in the lawsuit, we included descriptions of just some of these social mission projects that Avi has been involved in, because he has provided so much support over the years for many projects, many of them that actually specifically go to coexistence and peace and coexistence projects. So for example, one project that was an extraordinary program is a program called MEET. It's the Middle East Entrepreneurs of Tomorrow, I think is what it's called. And it is a program that's run with MIT in Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And what it does is it actually brings together Palestinian high school students and Israeli high school students over a period of 3 years while they're in high school. So for the summers, over 3 years in high school, these cohorts come together and they try and teach them these entrepreneurial skills. But not only are they teaching them how to be entrepreneurs and business, but they're providing the opportunity for these students to really engage with each other, to share their narratives, to develop real friendships, relationships, partnerships. And some of these students, by the end of the 3 years, then actually go off to MIT together. And this was a program where at one point their funding was in jeopardy. and it looked like they might not be able to run their summer program. And Avi Zinger arranged for $100,000 donation from Ben & Jerry's to the program that saved it that summer. And not only that, but he invited the board members and the management of Ben & Jerry's to come to one of the graduation ceremonies.
And did they come?
They came. Not only they came, they raved about it. They loved it.
Let me ask you a question, Alyza.
Yes.
So they had this relationship. He's into social justice. He's been selling Judea and Samaria. So why all of a sudden do they wake up one day and say, you know what, this is a problem? He's been on page and everything. Why
So
now?
it wasn't overnight. The BDS activists had been pushing and pushing and pushing at Ben & Jerry's for, quite frankly, almost a decade. And they started, and each year it would intensify. So, they started with letter writing. Then they started by going after the different American franchise shops, at the Ben & Jerry's shops on free cone day, when you have customers lined up down the block waiting to get their free Ben & Jerry's ice cream cone. They started handing out aggressive flyers, condemning Ben & Jerry's for selling in the territories. And then they turned around and they started online petitions and campaigns. So the pressure kept mounting and mounting. And honestly, it was, if you think about what happened in May of 2021, and you think about the online explosion of anti-Israel hate that you saw after the Gaza conflict, I think it was in the aftermath of that the pressure just got to the point where Ben
They
&
said we're
Jerry's.
doing it. So, but now you wrote about all the social justice project Avi Zinger and the Israelis Ben & Jerry did. Now that's great for property. That's great for publicity. But in the terms of law, it wouldn't have any effect, or would it? In the lawsuit.
Well, what's interesting is right now, what you have, for instance, is that Ben & Jerry's Vermont is arguing with Unilever. That's in this recent lawsuit.
You won the case where Unilever decided they're going to sell the Ben & Jerry's to Israel and be out of it and let them do what they want to do. And Ben & Jerry's America, the Vermont Ben & Jerry's, they decide they're going to sue Unilever and probably the Israeli, because they don't want the divestment of Ben & Jerry's from Unilever, right? So now,
I'll answer both of those questions. So what happened is, in our lawsuit, we filed the lawsuit. We were seeking an injunction where the court would order Ben & Jerry's to continue its relationship with Avi, at least until we could negotiate a resolution to this dispute that we were having. And Unilever, to its credit, recognized that the right thing to do was to make sure that Avi Zinger, who has been providing Ben & Jerry's ice cream to everyone in Israel, right? Arabs, Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, everyone should be able to continue to provide that ice cream forever, right? Throughout Israel. And so they negotiated and worked out a resolution where Avi Zinger now has that exclusive right to continue doing what he's been doing with all the same, with the formulas and the ingredients and the look and feel, right, of the packaging. It's all the exact same, and provide Ben & Jerry's ice cream on that basis. And now he'll use the Hebrew and the Arabic logos and trademarks. That's what he's going to do, and that's his business. Now, the board in Vermont is unhappy because that means that there's no way anymore to stop the sale of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel. They've now just given the manufacturer and distributor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel the business outright and said, go ahead. With our blessing, Unilever says, you keep selling it. So the board in Vermont is unhappy about that, and they're trying to undo that deal. The argument that they're making, and this is where the social mission comes in, the argument that they're making, among other things, is that Unilever, they're saying, we, Ben & Jerry's board, we have like ownership over this social mission. And you, Unilever, have now violated it by giving this to Avi Zinger. That's so preposterous, because Avi Zinger, through these concrete examples that we were just talking about, has done more to promote peace and coexistence in Israel and in the territory than the Ben & Jerry's board or BDS with their empty rhetoric. And what this just goes to show is that BDS is nothing but hateful propaganda and empty rhetoric that it's not helping. In fact, it's harming the people that BDS claims they want to support. But Avi Zinger, right, he's the one who's not only, talking the talk, but walking the walk. I mean, he's the one who's actually making the change.
Alyza Lewin is our guest, president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, who also works with her father, the famous Nat Lewin and the Lewin, and we're looking at the Ben & Jerry's ice cream case. Now, here's the irony. Originally, when you got involved, Alyza, and your father got involved representing Avi Zinger of the Israeli Ben & Jerry's, so you were suing on behalf of the Israeli Ben & Jerry's, the American Ben & Jerry's, and Unilever Corporation, the parent company of Ben & Jerry's. Now that you worked out a deal with Unilever selling the company to Ben & Jerry's of Israel, so the board in Vermont, the original Ben & Jerry's, don't want it, so they are suing Unilever and the Israeli Ben & Jerry's, and the Israeli Ben & Jerry's is now working there with Unilever against the Vermont Ben & Jerry's, right?
Right. So the one correction is the Vermont Ben & Jerry's has not yet sued Ben & Jerry's Israel. They've only sued Unilever. So their lawsuit is just the subsidiary against the parent. So Vermont is suing Unilever. However, Unilever, in its response to its own board, has now adopted our lawsuit, basically, and Avi Zinger's line, because in the papers that Unilever filed earlier this week, they not only made reference to, but they included as an exhibit the entire declaration that Avi Zinger submitted in our lawsuit, where he told his whole story and included all the exhibits to his declaration. So email exchanges where the Ben & Jerry's board was affirming that they would be renewing his license, things like this were all now included in Unilever's papers as part of Unilever's argument against its own subsidiary. So now Unilever is arm in arm with Avi Zinger, defending the deal that they made with Avi Zinger and opposing the Ben & Jerry's board, which is basically, as I said earlier, acting, kind of as a front or as the face of the BDS movement.
Now, I heard a lot of American Jews saying, "Oh, we're glad that Unilever's selling the subsidiary in Israel to Avi Zinger, because now you can eat Ben & Jerry's again." And just when you thought you can eat Ben & Jerry's again, you can't eat Ben & Jerry's in America. You can only eat it in Israel, not the United States. So I know a lot of people are worried about it. But here's the thing, though. At the end of the day is the law. And what we spoke about earlier, you have Ben & Jerry's Vermont really want Avi Zinger to break Israeli law and American law. So how do they expect to win in a court of law? And I don't know how far advanced you were in the lawsuit when Unilever announced that they were going to sell the Israeli branch to Avi Zinger, but isn't it all hinge on what the law is? And here, how can you expect the company to violate the law and their own agreement?
I agree with you. So we didn't get to the point where the court could rule on that. Where we were is the parties had agreed that the court in New Jersey had to decide the injunction motion. So the court was going to have to rule whether or not Unilever and Ben & Jerry's could terminate Avi's license at the end of this year. And what we were saying is we may have to negotiate damages or other parts of this, but as long as this case is going on, the court has to protect the status quo and make sure that Avi can continue operating his business past the end of this year. That's where we were. The agreement was that the court will decide the injunction, and then any other questions could go, as the contract between the parties had agreed, to arbitration. So we were poised, all the papers had been filed, we were poised for the court to make that determination. I, of course, lawyers believe in their own position. I think we had a very, very strong argument, and I think that there was a good chance that we could have won that preliminary injunction. Ironically, had we won it, that might have been the best thing for Unilever, because then Unilever wouldn't have found itself now in a battle with its own subsidiary, because the court would have said, you've got to keep that contract going. But now that we negotiated and we settled, the negotiations settled our lawsuit. We dismissed our lawsuit. And in New Jersey, all of the parties have to sign a stipulation to dismiss the lawsuit. So ironically, Ben and Jerry's Vermont actually signed that stipulation to dismiss our lawsuit, because what we negotiated with Unilever resolved that case. So that's yet another reason why I think
So what happened? They changed their
Sure.
mind since the resolution of
well, it is their it's the higher ups that signed it, and it's now the board that's complaining
getting
about it.
upset about.
Right.
Now, what I would say, and then maybe this is a factor in why Unilever decided to sell the Israeli Ben & Jerry's to Avi Zinger, is I don't believe anybody anticipated the response, both from the public and corporations and state governments, where they wanted to just punish Unilever. I think it may have had a fact on the impact. So what do we need it for? A company has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders. And by the way, maybe another argument is, how could they expect Ben & Jerry's to prevail, the one in Vermont, when it goes against the fiduciary responsibility of Unilever to the shareholders? And this is certainly not in the interests of the shareholders.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it became very apparent to Unilever that this is not just a dispute between Avi Zinger and the company. This became much more than that. And it was clear to Unilever that this issue was not going away. Like you're saying, it was the different states attorneys general and the divestment in the different states. It was the Israel Competition Authority that had reached out and was claiming that this was a violation of their consent decree. It was, the outcry from organizations around the world that were upset. It was the Knesset members who are now starting in the law committee to actually discuss and debate the potential sanctions that could be taken against Unilever. So it was clear this was not ending. What our lawsuit did is, it was also clear that there was no way to resolve this without dealing directly with Avi Zinger. And to Avi's credit, he realized that he couldn't resolve this just as a business deal. He had to resolve this on behalf of the Jewish people at large. And so it was very, very important to Avi that whatever resolution was reached addressed that boycott, divestment, and sanctions piece, that it addressed that issue so that it would be a clear victory for the Jewish people against those that really seek its destruction.
Now, did Avi Zinger have any losses in Israel because of this whole brouhaha?
It has been very, very difficult. You noted the distinction between how now people feel they should buy Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel, but not buy it in the United States. There's a lot of confusion in Israel. There are people in Israel who don't realize that he has been the one fighting the fight and fighting the cause. They mistakenly think that he is the Ben & Jerry's saying these terrible things. So there are people who have pushed to boycott him in Israel, who have vandalized some of his freezers or his trucks. And even now, he was telling me the other day that when the Vermont Ben & Jerry's sued Unilever, just days after his settlement was announced, he had people in Israel contacting him saying, "Why are you suing Unilever?" And he said, I'm not suing Unilever. I'm now on the side with Unilever against Vermont. But people are still very confused, and it's very hard for him.
So this is my next question, Alyza. So should he sue Ben & Jerry's Vermont because of restraint of trade and also the damages that he had because of what they did?
So we'll see what happens now. Right now, Unilever is forcefully defending their deal with Avi. Avi's hasn't been sued. He's not in that.
No, but he lost business even with the original lawsuit. So can he sue Ben & Jerry's Vermont for business losses?
He had, but again, you have to realize that Ben & Jerry's Vermont is a subsidiary of Unilever. So right now, Unilever gets a lot of credit for having done the right thing and for defending this deal. And and it's a done deal. I mean, that's the thing that's also important to know, is that deal is done and closed and finished. And Avi Zinger now is moving forward to continue pursuant to that.
So is Ben & Jerry's Vermont trying to do an injunction against the deal? What are they trying to do?
They're trying to get an injunction to stop the deal, but the deal has already gone through. That's why I think that it is, I'm I'm cautiously optimistic, since you always have to be cautiously optimistic, but
Right.
that Unilever will prevail in this, and that Avi will be able
But I'm
to.
trying to say, can, as a matter of law, and I understand there's relation with Unilever and Ben and Jerry's Vermont, and they sold the company, but they have authority in certain social issues. Can, as a matter of law, can Avi Zinger and the Israeli Ben and Jerry's sue the Ben and Jerry's Vermont for damages of what happened prior to the settlement?
So because the arrangement that and the deal that he worked out was an arrangement that resolved our lawsuit, which included those claims, the answer to that right now would be no, because this deal was a settlement of all of those claims, right? In other words, anything in the past that was addressed in this.
But since Ben and Jerry's Vermont is suing you, who knows if they sued you?
So that's so then the question is, are they going to be successful in unraveling this deal? So if they're not successful, and if there's, I don't believe they're going to be successful.
But I'm saying, but didn't they open up Pandora's box? Or if they sue Ben and Jerry's Israel, does that change the situation? Ben and Jerry's can sue them for damages, because even though it was settled, but they opened up the box again. You understand my legal?
Right, no, I understand what you're saying. I think that right now, the way the situation is, which I hope will end up bringing us to some final closure, is that Unilever and Avi Zinger have a done deal. Unilever is now on Avi Zinger's side, defending that deal against the Vermont board. The Vermont board is grasping at straws to try desperately to salvage a completely and totally BDS loss, right? They thought they were about and on the verge of having all Ben and Jerry's ice cream sales in Israel cease everywhere. There would be no Ben and Jerry's in Israel. And what they did is they ended up losing that business. And so now the result of that attempt of a BDS, and what BDS had been touting as its big win, turned into BDS's greatest loss, because now they can never stop the sales of Ben and Jerry's ice cream in Israel. It's been removed from their ability and their authority to control it at all. And they are trying desperately to get it back, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
But Liz, in the interim, here's my final question. Should American Jews buy Ben and Jerry's United States or not while this is still going on?
I think that American Jews should buy another Unilever product, maybe Talenti, and thank Unilever, but for the time being, only buy your Ben and Jerry's in Israel. Good
solution. Alyza Lewin, president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. Also with Lewin and Lewin, she and her father had a major scoop where they really got Unilever to sell the Israeli Ben and Jerry's to Avi Zinger, even though there's another lawsuit, but hopefully that'll be resolved. We have to have you back, and there's so many different things that you're doing, so it's been too long, but we appreciate your being here with us.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure, Zev.
Thanks for listening.
For continuous Jewish programs, talklinenetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the talklinenetwork.com.